Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Canadian Council of the Blind's Toronto Visionaries chapter, I want to welcome you to Vision Health Month's 2023 Expo Forum. This has been a busy month for the Council. As we conclude Vision Health Month with our fourth event, going back to May 2nd, we held a joint meet and greet event with the CNIB on Parliament Hill, where we were joined by over 80 senators, members of parliaments, and Vision stakeholders. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of Senator Asha Seth's bill proclaiming each May as Vision Health Month. And listen to the Honorable Judy Scrow discuss her private member's bill, C-284. A bill calling for a national strategy on vision health that, when passed later this year, will be the most consequential legislation ever passed and dedicated to vision health care for all Canadians. Then just last week, midday on May 16th, we presented our conference discussing new treatments for eye disease and vision of the future. This carried over into the evening when CCB hosting a gathering of stakeholders to the continuing of the day's discussion. This brings us to this afternoon as we close out the month with our Expo Forum and a discussion on our working group's progress working with the Ministry of Health in reforming Ontario's Assistive Device Program. If you missed these events, they will be up on the CCB's website Wednesday, May 31st, so that you may view them. Now, before I get started, I would like to introduce and ask to stand Jim Tokus, National President of the Canadian Council of the Blind, and CCB Director Leslie Yee. And now the founder of this great event and the president of CCB's Toronto Visionaries chapter, Ian White. What some of you might not know is that last week on May 16th, Ian was presented with the Canadian Council of the Blind's Person of the Year Award. Moving along, the CCB and its members honor the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, First Nations, Inuit, Metis peoples, and acknowledges that Ottawa, home of our head office, and where we are here today in Toronto, are unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territories. The peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The CCB honors the peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. The CCB honors all First Nations, Inuit, Metis peoples, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land here in Toronto and across Canada. Along with the Government of Canada, we at the CCB are committed to a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. The CCB stands with the Ukraine. Through the fog of war and amid our prayers for lasting peace, the Canadian Council of the Blind would like to express its deep concern and support for the people of the Ukraine, in particular, our brothers and sisters in the blind, deafblind, and partially sighted community. This unjustified war continues to take the lives of innocent civilians, violates all norm of international and humanitarian law, and is a crime against humanity. We join the free world in condemning the violence in the Ukraine and call for the illegal invaders to cease hostilities. We urge the European Union of the Blind and its members to provide all possible assistance and accommodation for refugees to the Ukraine with visual disabilities. Now I would like to introduce today's panelists. Not here yet, but on her way, Dr. Una Trevianis, Director of Inclusive Design Research Center and a professor in the Faculty of Design at OCAD University. Uda will be discussing their history and an overview of the Ontario ADP. Luna Bengio, Senior Advisor, Accessibility Expert on, and then Strategic Advisor on Accessibility. Luna will be speaking on why ADP is so important to people living with vision loss. Dr. Keith Gordon, Senior Research Officer of the CCB. Keith will focus on recommendations from the 2021 survey report, Reforming Ontario's Assistive Devices. Ian White is the president of the Toronto Visionaries chapter of the CCB and is a client of ADP. Ian will focus on progress on reforming the ADP, where we are now and what we need to do in the future. And as a special guest tonight, and we thank him for making himself available, David Sashow, Director, Delivery and Eligibility Relief Review Branch at the Ontario Ministry of Health. David will speak to the reform of the ADP and what the ADP is doing to respond to the recommendations of the 2021 survey report. Lisa Tyrrell, who is also on her way, Executive Director of Healthcare Operations, Ontario Vision Loss Rehabilitation Canada, will be will be here, and with the rest of the speakers will be available to answer questions on the ADP process, vision loss rehabilitation's role. With that, let me introduce our first speaker, Luna Bengio. Luna is coming to us from Ottawa.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. From sunny Ottawa. It's a beautiful Saturday. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank Michael and Jim and Ian and the CCB for inviting me here this afternoon. I think it's well known. It's a well-known notion that the quality of a society really is reflected by the way in which it deals with its most vulnerable people. And in Canada, we have a strong tradition of human rights, a strong culture of diversity. We now have incredible legislation, first with the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and now with the Canadian, the Accessible Canada Act, legislation that really recognizes the importance of society removing barriers to the full participation of people with disabilities. For people who are blind or have partially sighted, a program like ADP is critical. In my head, I always think of analogies, and the way I see the devices that ADP can provide, they are like the keys to the doors that we need to open so that people who are blind or partially sighted can fully participate, can lead the lives that they choose to lead, and can really avoid to be hampered by obstacles that are in front of them. So those keys are the adaptive devices, and more, they are mainstream devices. More and more, we see computers that have built-in magnification, built-in screen readers. Of course, everyone here is familiar with Apple technology, an iPhone, and how liberating and how enabling a smartphone like an iPhone can be for someone who is blind or partially sighted. So the CCB decided to undertake this road to advocate for a modernization of ADP. And if I had been here perhaps maybe 10 months ago, I would be less hopeful than I am today. I think that we are finally having a very constructive dialogue, and Utah and Ian and then David will be able to tell you lots more about that. But to me, I see that we're finally having this dialogue. And there are two important concepts for me when it comes to a program like ADP. The first one is it really needs to understand that technology today evolves, of course, much faster than it used to. And so, in order to remain relevant and to be useful to the clients it serves, it really needs to develop this agility, this adaptability that is hard to have for government programs, but it's still something that is going to be critical for people in Ontario who are blind or partially sighted. The second very important things, and you've probably heard me say these things before, is the importance of including users or clients. The importance of ensuring that users and clients can be influencing the policies, the practices, the decisions that are going to have a serious impact on their lives. And what can have a more serious impact on your life than the tool that you use to go to school, to work, or to live your life with less obstacles. Let's say that our world is still full of obstacles for people who are blind or partially sighted. It's still a challenge for it's still a struggle every day for someone who is blind to do things that everyone else takes for granted. However, as that world becomes more accessible, we are still going to need those adaptive devices. We're still going to need those tools that are going to be the keys to open those doors. And so, therefore, that's why a program like ADP is so important. I will recognize my privilege in that I've had a successful career. I've worked all my life. It isn't the case for many people who are blind. Still today, people struggle to get jobs, to access education, to go to university. And a program like ADP is bound to make a huge difference if we manage to get it to the point where it needs to be. It needn't be a lot more expensive than it is. It just needs to be more responsive, more in tune with the evolution of the needs of people who are blind or partially sighted, and the evolution of the technology out there, which of course is changing much more rapidly than it used to. So with that, I think that it is critical, just like I need my stool in my kitchen to reach the top of my cupboard. Adaptive devices, I need adaptive devices. We need adaptive devices to be able to level that playing field, to be able to work, to be able to play, to be able to live as full members of society, so that at some point we get to a moment in history where people who are blind or partially sighted are not just from the outside looking in. They are part of the diversity of Canada's society. So thank you very much for having me here today. And Michael, back to you.
Thank you very much, Luna. It's Keith Gordon here. I'm the Senior Research Officer of the Canadian Council of the Blind. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the survey that we did to get an understanding of what users and non-users were experiencing with the ADP. I've spoken about that at this meeting last year, but I'd like to focus in on the recommendations because that's what we've been dealing with at the ADP working group, which Ian and David Chaka are going to speak about. So I have some slides here, which are meant mainly for me. I will be speaking to everything on the slide, so don't worry about having to see it. It'd be very nice if they move forwards.
Technology is fantastic when it works, right?
Okay. All right. Oh, here we are. Okay. So a bit of background. Luna has pointed out the value that the ADP program has for people living with vision loss. And we've been privileged to have this program for over 30 years in Ontario. And when it was set up, the technology that it covered was very, very different. In the last 10, 15 years, technology has revolutionized all of our lives, but particularly the lives of people living with vision loss to such a dramatic degree that there are now very few activities that a person who is blind or partially sighted cannot participate in when equipped with the appropriate technology. And I love your analogy, Luna, of just having a little set of stairs that will enable you to get the top of your cupboard, because I think that that's really what technology is assisting people living with vision loss to be able to do. In spite of all of this, in spite of the need for this technology, in spite of the fact that it's revolutionized people's lives, only 6,000 people with vision loss received ADP funding in 2019, 2020, out of a population of 466,000 Ontarians living with vision loss. Let me say that again, 6,000 people are accessing the program out of 466,000. So there's a very, very valuable resource here. People aren't accessing it, and we wanted to know why. So we went out and we conducted this survey. And first of all, we formed the Vision Loss ADP Reform Working Group, which consisted of a number of stakeholder organizations, the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, CCB Toronto Visionaries Chapter, Vision Loss Rehabilitation Ontario, the CNIB Foundation, Fighting Blindness Canada, Balance for Blind Adults, and CCB Get Together with Technology Program, and the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University. So all of us got together and we decided we were going to do a survey. The survey was conducted in November 2021, and we reported on it in last year's Vision Expo. We got a very robust group. There were about over 500 respondents. And out of this came a series of recommendations, which is what I'm going to talk to now. And it was the recommendations that we're working away on at the ADP working group, this group that's been put together with the ADP staff and the stakeholders. So the first recommendation, and we've put these recommendations together basically in two tiers. There are 14 recommendations that we're currently working on, and then there are about another 10 that we hope to get to once we get through these. So the first set starts with recommendation number 1, and Ian will tell you a little bit about how we're progressing on this. The first recommendation is that people requiring a white cane should not have to be authorized other than having a doctor's certificate saying that they are blind. Basic white canes should be provided free to everyone requiring them. And I won't get into that in any more detail, but we're just saying that extensive authorization for reimbursement of a white cane should not be necessary. Recommendation number 2 is that the ADP should conduct a thorough review and reevaluation of the administration and delivery of the ADP to Ontario's vision loss community. And part of what we're doing in the working group that you're going to hear about later today is doing exactly that. Third recommendation is that we should bring the ADP in line with Ontario commitments to service design. The Ontario government has been undertaking this whole initiative called service design. We believe the ADP should fall in line with that. They should review the cost, efficacy, and impact of all administrative gatekeeping processes. Do we need to do things simply because things need approval? There's a cost associated with many of these things, and you may not be recovering the cost in the process. So we feel all of those processes should all be reviewed. Recommendation number 4 is that we task the ADP reform working group to immediately reevaluate the present availability of devices and visual aids through the program, deleting and adding as deemed necessary. So there's a group of devices that the ADP is currently reimbursing, and we believe that the first thing that we should do is immediately cut out the devices that are not necessary on that list and add essential devices to the list as quickly as possible. Recommendation 5 is once the ADP Reform Working Group has successfully reevaluated and updated the present list of available visual aids, to establish a device review group to regularly review available visual aid devices and make recommendations for the addition or deletion of those funded by the ADP. Okay, so step 1 in the previous recommendation is to review the current list, get rid of the old ones and add some new ones. But on an ongoing basis, there should be a device review group that looks at devices on a regular basis and reviews applications for new devices. Recommendation number 6 is while awaiting the reviews I've just talked about, the ADP should immediately initiate the provision of the recognized and necessary mainstream devices, including but not limited to smartphones, tablets, and laptops with the ability to run applicable apps. All should be equipped with the necessary adaptive software and where applicable, hardware incorporating Braille display. So notwithstanding the list that I talked about that we need to update, we need to keep going, there are certain devices that we believe are essential and they should be given priority in looking at the possibility of reimbursing them as soon as possible. And that is smartphones, tablets, and laptops. Recommendation number 7, to improve the authorization process. The authorization process is very complicated. The ADP should immediately expedite approvals for all outstanding applications for new authorizers. At the time we did the survey, there were a number of outstanding applications. The ADP should institute an online authorization process so that you don't have to travel to Scarborough if you live in Mississauga in order to get authorized for a simple device that could be done online. Investigate all possible means for expanding the number of authorizers across the province so that somebody living in Kapuskasing doesn't have to go to Sudbury to get authorized. Recommendation number 8 is the Government of Ontario should commit to not purchasing any mainstream device or app that does not incorporate essential accessibility. Okay, so this is not the ADP program. We're going beyond that. We believe that the Government of Ontario, since they have signed an Accessible Ontario Act, and the Government of Ontario should commit to not purchasing any mainstream device or app that doesn't incorporate essential accessibility. So this is a little outside of the scope of the ADP, but we feel the ADP program can play a role in getting the government to do this. Recommendation number 8, we should shorten the time at every step involved in acquiring approval of ADP funding and implement a program where applicants can apply virtually. One shouldn't have to write a letter to the ADP program and wait several weeks to get a response. Application should be able to be done virtually. Recommendation number 10, people who have been funded by the ADP should not have to be reauthorized when they apply for funding on a subsequent occasion. So if you've been authorized to get a particular device and you need a new device, your device broke down or you've had it for 5 years, you shouldn't have to go through the whole authorization program to get a renewed device. Recommendation number 11, the frequency of reimbursement for replacement devices should be individualized relative to the nature of the device. So right now, it appears that most devices are eligible for renewal, for renewed reimbursement on the same schedule. Some devices might last 7 years, some might last 2 years. So the nature of the device should be taken into account when you look at reimbursement. Recommendation number 12 is the province should take the necessary steps with the federal government to ensure that all visual aid devices funded by the ADP are exempt from HST. So you get 75% of most devices are reimbursed, but you've still got to pay HST on the full cost of the device. Recommendation 13, all visual aid devices should be available at no cost to people receiving the guaranteed income supplement. We feel the guaranteed income supplement should be a measure of the affordability of these devices, and people receiving the GIS should get their devices at no cost. And finally, in the first tier, recommendation 14, the Minister of Health should initiate an audit of the Ministry of Health's compliance to the availability of accessible technology and should reach out to the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility to report how the provincial government is complying with accessible technology availability. So I had suggested that the government shouldn't buy new devices unless they're accessible, but we need to know how the government is doing now. If somebody comes in to get a job in the Ministry of Health right now, can they be guaranteed that they're going to get an accessible computer? And the only way that's going to happen is that there should be an audit of the Ministry of Health and all other government departments. And we're recommending that as our recommendation 14. So that's the list of 14 that we've been working away on, and Ian and David are going to talk more about it. I'd just like to run quickly through our second tier recommendations. I'm not going to talk to them. The first one is that authorization fees should be eliminated. Second one is we recommend that the online purchase of devices from vendors and major retailers should be facilitated. Right now, one has to go to a vendor to get a device. Funding for all devices needs to include the costs associated with training, if, when, and where necessary. So it shouldn't just cover the device, but should include the training. All devices funded by the ADP should include unlimited free software upgrades and the full cost of repair of the device within the effective lifespan of their acquisition. The ADP should advise the technology sector that following a 1-year warning, they'll no longer be funding devices that are not fully accessible and that do not include free upgrades and initial training. The ADP should work with the Ministry of Education to facilitate training in the use of ADP-funded visual aid devices. So training is good, but Ministry of Education has a role to play in getting involved in the training in the use of ADP-funded devices. The ADP should work with the Ministry of Education to, I already said that. I've got it twice. Okay. The ADP, through its application process, should collect client contact information, including email addresses. When we wanted to do our survey, we couldn't find out from the ministry, from the ADP, who had been accessing their program. They didn't have any email addresses for the people that accessed the program. If you want to have regular contact with your clients, it's essential that you collect email addresses. The ADP should undertake regular surveys of all people accessing ADP funding. Right now, if you buy something from Amazon, you immediately get an email asking you what your experience was like. We feel that the ADP should be doing exactly the same with all clients accessing their program. That is the only way that you're going to know whether you're meeting the needs of the client. The ADP should undertake a comprehensive marketing and communication strategy designed to increase awareness of the availability and benefits of the program for people living with vision loss. It should also include vision health and vision rehabilitation professionals. So we've got 6,000 people out of 466,000 using the program. Some of that is that people are just not aware of it. So we believe that the ADP needs to constantly have a comprehensive marketing program going to vision professionals, vision rehabilitation professionals, optometrists, ophthalmologists, and all people that they have on the list of living with vision loss. So that's a long list of recommendations. We hope that you'll see that we have made some progress in achieving some of these recommendations. The ADP is a unique and excellent program, as Luna has described. It meets the needs of a lot of people in Ontario. We'd like to see it meet the needs of more people and be trimmed down so that it's running as efficiently as possible and being of real value to Ontarians living with vision loss. It may seem like a long road, but working together with all the organizations and the ADP program itself, I think we're making progress. We're a little bit along this road. And with that, I will introduce our next speaker, who will tell you a little bit about how far we've come. And that is Ian White, who is president of the Toronto Visionaries chapter of the Canadian Council of the Blind.
Thanks.
Ian, please come in.
Thanks. As Keith said, we're on a journey. I think what's been really interesting is to see the trajectory. I was speaking with George Stevens just a little bit before the presentations began about how this all got started, and it was actually George and his confederates at the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians who started sort of shaking the trees and initiated the process of getting the survey together. The survey gave us quantitative data and a firm set of recommendations to go to the ministry with. And it's because of that survey and because of the report that Keith has put together and the recommendations coming out of that report that we were able to gain the attention of people in the Ministry of Health and be able to sit down with our partners in the ADP administration to try to work through how to implement these recommendations in a realistic and concrete fashion. It is a journey. One of the things that's been really interesting for me, because I've never done this kind of advocacy work before, is getting to know the process. One of the things that's been really interesting is how many assumptions were made going into the process and how the discovery of how the program is actually structured and how it is constructed in a way to make sure that the government's money is being spent appropriately. How that all impacts its ability to be flexible and maneuverable and responsive, which are all the things that we're sort of striving to have happen. But I think it's been a deep dive into the process from initial referral to getting in to see an assessor, to being assessed, to being authorized, to going through connecting with a vendor, working with them to define exactly what the equipment is you need, having them provide that, set it up, and provide the training and support that often follows upon the provision of a particular device. I myself am often boggled by the sheer complexity of the system. There are so many operational things inside ADP and outside ADP that constrains what it can do, just based on the fact that it is a government program. Just going through the process of discovering who actually has authority to make change. Because again, walking into this process, I probably naively thought that the senior administrators at ADP would be the final go-to on all things ADP. But what I've discovered, and what I think we as a working group have discovered, is that there are layers of oversight that operate around the ADP. For example, things like the whole sort of funding approval process. There is a process within ADP that has to do with looking at new devices that have come forward. There's a group called the Visual Aids Evaluation Group that we didn't even know existed, that apparently is a group of contractors living with vision loss who come from an assistive tech background and will do an initial assessment on a new device recommendation and will evaluate it against the program's parameters. If they greenlight it, it then goes through to a completely separate organization at Ontario Health called the Ontario Health Technology Assessment Committee, which does a full-blown demographic research. They do an economic impact study. They will involve people from stakeholder groups to comment on the utility of a given device. They cover a lot of ground. They cover basically every new device that comes in for funding under the Ministry of Health. So they deal with surgical procedures, new technologies for doing diagnostics, imaging, basically anything that is a tool that is used by the Ministry of Health, they evaluate. And as part of their mandate, they are required to do a full assessment on any funding request for new assistive technologies as well. Didn't know that. That's one of the constraints that ADP operates under. One of the issues that we've been working towards is trying to increase the number of particularly high-tech assessment centers across the province. And in order to do that, there's a requirement that a certain amount of equipment be supplied to an assessment center in order for the assessors there to have a full range of products to be able to do assessments with. And what we have discovered is that there's another division under the Ministry of Health called CPAC that provides that equipment. And we have yet to sit down with them. We've actually got something set up for, I think it's this coming Wednesday, to sit down with CPAC and Vision Loss Rehab and talk to them about what are the mechanisms for them providing a full range of products to the assessment centers, to try to see if there are ways to facilitate putting more assessment centers in across the province. We've done a deep dive into a lot of the documents and processes that ADP operates with, particularly their policies, their administrative policies, the policy and procedures document for ADP, which is the main governing document for the entire program. There's also a program administration manual, which is for visual aids, that talks about the specific needs of the visual aids category. There are a total, I think it's 18 categories. David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There are 18 categories of devices for different disability groups in under the ADP's purview. Visual aids is one of them, and it has its own manual. And then there's the product manual, which lists the specific devices that are funded and the frequency at which they can be funded and the prices involved. One of the things that's been really interesting is trying to work within some of these constraining factors, because we've started out from the belief that the program actually does make sense. We're not trying to disassemble it and reconstruct something new. What we're trying to do is find ways to work within and around the system so that some of these recommendations can go forward in a meaningful way without upsetting the entire apple cart and deconstructing the program right down to its foundations. Just as an example of that, one of the things that was a concern right out of the gate was a concern from ADP that we not try to reconstruct the vision and mission of the overall program. Because if we start tampering at that foundational level, we're impacting all 18 of those categories and potentially undercutting the effectiveness of the program going forward. So we looked very carefully at the wording of the vision and mandate, and discovered that in fact its stated goals are actually quite admirable. The idea is the program is set up to provide people with disabilities the assistive technology that they need in order to meet their basic needs. And that sounds as true today as it was back in the 1970s when that document was drafted. What has changed, and this has been alluded to by Luna and by Keith, is that the definition of basic needs has shifted as technology has evolved, as society has evolved. We live in a digital world now. That digital world did not exist in the 1970s when this program was put together. So what we need to do is work within that mandate, work within that vision, and bring the system into line with the current needs of people with disabilities. And that includes some of the technologies that are on the market now and that are being used by people with vision loss every day. We're kind of, it's been a really interesting discussion around what constitutes an assistive device and how assistive devices are evaluated. One of the things that we've been really sort of stressing with ADP, and the response from the administration has been actually really positive, is this idea that what we're looking for are assistive devices, not medical devices. We're not looking for clinical evidence of people being cured or, having been prevented from going blind. This is not what assistive devices do. What assistive devices do is they enhance the quality of life and the access to living a full, rich life as part of a society. We're not sick. We're disabled. It's a very different headspace. When you look at evaluating a new device, if you're looking for clinical evidence on the impact of my white cane on me, you're not going to find that it cured me. What you're going to find is that I'm able to get around on my own independently without having to wait for somebody else or be guided or, rely on other kinds of supports. The devices that we use enable us to participate in whatever aspect of life we want to pursue. And that's a basic thing that all Ontarians should have access to. As I've said, our strategy has been to work as thoroughly as we can within the structures that exist, identifying where those structures are creating barriers and trying to find ways, working collaboratively with ADP on finding solutions to those barriers, trying to disassemble them, get them out of the way. Sometimes those discussions are very straightforward and some of them are very complicated. part of the reason it's been taking as long as it has is that some of these things are extraordinarily complicated. The system itself is very complex. And for us to be able to figure out where the choke points are and how to solve around them requires us to know a great deal about the system and how it works. That's required us to do a lot of clarifying the mechanisms that operate within the system. One of the examples of that is just the processes that are available to us for putting new devices onto the equipment list. And I've described a little bit about the number of sort of authorizations and processes that have to go into that when a manufacturer comes forward with a new device, wants it evaluated through VAEG, then through OTAC, then it goes to the ministry, et cetera. There is another avenue that we're exploring for things that are brought forward by a manufacturer. The process is identified as it is, but there's another mechanism that we're actually engaged in conversation with ADP right now about, because a lot of the things that are on the visual aids product manual list are actually not manufacturer driven. They're generic specifications for a type of equipment that's based on a functional need. And so we're in the middle of exploring whether or not the entire list could be structured that way, which would give flexibility to the assessor to identify a particular product that meets that functional need for a client, instead of relying on manufacturers to come forward with a specific product that they would like to have listed. So there are a number of opportunities that are being looked at. And again, it's a fascinating conversation to go back and forth between ADP administration saying, that's a really interesting idea, let's explore that and see how we can make that work. And they take it away to their internal people and see if it can function. And then they bring that back to the table and we discuss it and try to refine it. One of the recommendations that Keith identified was the idea that we need to have some kind of an advisory body to be looking not only at ADP processes to see if they're working effectively and efficiently, but also to bring forward recommendations for new technologies as they emerge. One of the things that we discovered about the Visual Aids Evaluation Group is that they actually cannot make a recommendation for a new piece of technology. That's not their role. We kind of thought it was when we got very excited when we first learned about them, but that enthusiasm faded fairly quickly because they're actually not permitted to do that. They have been useful in other ways, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, I've already talked about that. Okay, sorry, just bear with me for a moment. Okay. Yeah, so we've had to do a lot of digging, and some of it has been outside of ADP, and some of it has been with their cooperation. Them providing us with information, for example, on the number of applications for funding that have come in arranged by postal code. And what that gives us an idea of is where people are who are applying for funding and where people are who are not applying for funding and where the gaps are. And I wish Lisa was here because she would be able to speak to that very directly. And that was information that was provided to us by ADP. Some of the other research that we've done has been again with ADP's cooperation. They've provided us with a quantitative list of all of the product codes that have been accessed over the last 10 years. And what this has done is it's allowed us to clearly identify the parts of the product manual that are either obsolete or are underutilized. And so one of the things that I'm actually really excited about as a bit of progress, and it sounds like baby steps, but it is actually something that has been being called for a couple of decades now, is for ADP to go through the list and actually remove obsolete equipment, things that are no longer manufactured or no longer in the marketplace. There are, as it stands right now, 12 products on the manual that are no longer available for purchase. And those things are being actively removed from the list. There's an additional 24 that have been accessed sort of a small handful of times over the last 5 years. And those products are being looked at for their relevance going forward. I wanted to talk a little bit about the proposal for white canes, and I'm actually hoping that David will go into some more detail on that. One of the things that we called for was that authorization should be through an eye care professional instead of through an O&M. And it was discovered through discussions and both with Vision Loss Rehab and a number of the other folks in the working group that it's important for a client new to vision loss to be assessed by an O&M just to make sure that they actually have the capability to engage in mobility and orientation safely. Once that initial authorization has been done, it's kind of like passing your driver's test, right? You don't need to go back to an O&M unless you need specific help with some goal that you have regarding orientation and mobility. You shouldn't have to go back to them annually for authorization for a white cane. That piece of it should be done either independently or through an eye care professional. And that's something that we are looking at. Yeah, recommendation 4 I've just spoken to, which is the looking at the product list. Getting things off the list is something that is directly within the purview of the director of the ADP. Getting things on the list, because it involves potentially expanding funding to the program, is something that has to go through this economic evaluation process. And what we're hoping to do is sit down with the folks who do that work and see if there are ways to streamline that process. Right now, OTAC on its website indicates that their standard process takes between 13 and 14 months to complete. And in terms of an overall process to get new equipment onto the visual aids product list, we're probably looking at an end-to-end process that's more like a couple of years. That's way too long. There are new technologies coming out all the time. New technologies are being developed, and new iterations of those technologies are coming out every couple of years. So where we don't want to be is in a situation where we've just had a product listed and that product's already been replaced by its successor. What we have been told by ADP is that if a device is listed and a new version of it comes out during the approval process, at the point that it's approved, it'll be the new device that's actually funded. So there's a process there. We need to look at it to see if it can be streamlined. That's an ongoing piece of the puzzle. We also had to do a bunch of research on the tax piece, because as Keith mentioned, one of the recommendations talks about making sure that everything on the Assistive Devices Program is available tax-free as an assistive device. The federal government has the Excise Tax Act, which has a series of schedules in it that identifies assistive and medical devices as being zero rated for tax. The difficulty that we've encountered is that while most of the products on the product manual for visual aids are indeed tax-free, there are several pieces of equipment that are not. They tend to be the things that are identified usually as consumer goods: laptops, tablets, scanners. There's a piece of mainstream OCR software that's available. There are a number of things, about half a dozen items that are still taxed. We believe that because they are being funded through an Assistive Devices Program, that they are being used by disabled people as assistive devices, that they should qualify as assistive devices under the excise tax definition. That's a conversation that's going to happen between ADP and the federal government, which might be challenging. But again, it was only through doing the investigation and really digging deep into this stuff that we were able to make those definitions and clarify the route forward. We are in the middle of compiling a list of new technologies, things that are on the market now, things that are being used by people with disabilities, particularly vision disabilities. And we will be presenting those for review by ADP to look at how we might streamline the process of getting some of those devices authorized or funded. It may involve reclassifying how devices are listed on the product manual. Right now, as you know, the high-tech devices are broken into basically two categories, reading and writing. This is terminology that harkens back to the origin of the program and really only deals with print disability. And what we're talking about now in our current situation is digital access. It's digital, a digital world we live in. And a lot of the tools that we could avail ourselves of are digital tools. And I'm thinking of things like smartphone apps for navigation, for OCR, for using brute AI to identify everything from the entry door to the TTC stop where you need to stand to catch your bus. Those are all things that need digital access in order to function and again, reinforce our independence and quality of life if we have access to the correct tools. Again, the idea that recommendation 5 talks about putting together an advisory panel of people with lived experience involving stakeholder organizations and people from within the ADP system itself, including assessors, vendors, in some cases possibly manufacturers, but certainly the core of it would be a lot of the people who have come together as part of the stakeholder group to work through this process with ADP, to continue to provide advice on processes and new technologies as they come forward. I think the one thing that we keep focusing back on is the idea of smartphones. And this really is one of those things that is so fundamental. It is the accessibility device of choice for probably about 3/4 of the blind community. It represents a convergence of a whole raft of technologies. And in fact, in one device could replace 5 or 6 conventional assistive devices as they're currently defined. There's a body of evidence that shows that this is the case. There is a demonstrated need through the CNIB's Phone It Forward program, which has provided hundreds of phones to people with vision loss over the last few years, and has been instrumental in their gaining independence and a decent quality of life. And I think that the GIS piece was identified pretty early on as one of those things that was very puzzling to us. You can get 100% funding if you're being supported by the Ontario Disability Support Program while you're of working age, and as soon as you hit 65, that 100% funding for assistive devices reverts back to the 75-25 split as soon as you retire. It made no sense to us. If you're in a poverty situation while you're of working age, that doesn't magically disappear when you hit 65. And one of the things that ADP has not addressed in its sort of core policies is this idea that poverty continues into the later years of life. So where do we go from here? what we're trying to do is really reduce the barriers that are in our way, reducing the number of times and the formats where authorizations are required. We're trying to combine a series of the recommendations that Keith had identified into an overall service delivery model in line with what the Ontario government adopted in 2021, which is their digital service standards. This is a comprehensive approach to providing government services on a digital platform and could theoretically streamline a lot of the current, often paper-based systems that are in place. It would certainly give ADP, if implemented, the ability to measure the entire client journey right from the very beginning, the first referral from an eye care specialist, right through to the adoption of a particular device in the hands of a particular client. Right now, what ADP focuses on as their main metric is once they receive a funding application request, they can turn that request around and approve funding within about a 2 or 3 week period, which is great. But that's only one piece of the overall puzzle. It's only one piece of the journey that a client goes through from initial referral right through to having the device in their hand and using it every day. So a lot more measurement, a lot more streamlining and making those processes available online, I think is where we want to head with that. It's a matter of hammering out an actual way to do that. I think with the conversations that are going on right now, as has been expressed, there's a good deal of hope around the table that we are making concrete progress. It is slow. We recognize that it is slow. The folks at ADP recognize that it is slow. But I think the important thing to keep in mind for us, at least, is that the working relationship we've developed over the last several months with the senior administration at ADP has been very positive and constructive and collaborative. And it continues to be that as we go forward. We're looking to put together some kind of a status report in the fall, September, October, and should have some very concrete things to say about how the 14 recommendations can be implemented at that time. We're doing all this, as Keith said, to really try to ramp up the uptake, to remove some of the blocks that have been preventing people, the 98% of people in Ontario with vision loss who are eligible to access this program and who just aren't. We would like to see those numbers really, really improve and get these devices that are so critical to our quality of life and our independence into the hands of the people who need them, with the government of Ontario and the Ministry of Health's support. And that's my presentation. I went a lot longer than the 20 minutes I was given. I always do. I'm sorry for that. But I would like to pass the baton now to David Sachow. David has been sort of the rock at the end of the table who has been helping us work through a lot of the complexity that he lives with and breathes with every day. David, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and I hope everyone else is too.
Thanks for inviting me to the forum today. It's really a privilege to be part of this conversation and engaging with the vision loss community. I'm sorry I'm not in person with you in person at the JCC today. I've got some family member activities taking place this morning and right after the session, way out here in the distant land of Scarborough. So, the Assistive Devices Program and the CCP Toronto Visionaries Chapter, along with participants from other vision loss organizations, we formed this visual aids working group in July of last year. As you've heard from other presentations, it was created in response to the recommendations from the CCB's survey. I have to tell you, I oversee two programs in the Ministry of Health. One's the Assistive Devices Program, and I also oversee the operations of the Ontario Drug Benefit Program. Hardly a day goes by without somebody, some person, some company approaching with coming into this request for something. And almost always the end result is going to be more money for that person or that company. That's the goal. They always tell me that, patients or clients will benefit, or the healthcare system or society as a whole, but somehow it always ends up with more money for them. What's different about the Canadian Council of the Blind's recommendations is that the requests and the recommendations clearly are focused on the benefit of people without vision and people with vision loss. And not all of them are going to cost me money, and that's very exciting. But it's really important that the Assistive Devices Program can be working with this group on changes that we can make that are actually going to help the people, the end users, the people with vision loss, the people without vision, so that, as I say, it's quite a contrast, and it's a very positive contrast with the usual people that come in to see me. So I'm very happy to be sitting and working with this august group of people, and as are the other people in the Assistive Devices Program that are doing a lot of the day-to-day work that supports the group. Since July, we've been gathering monthly to develop meaningful solutions for those recommendations. We really appreciate in ADP, this group has been one of true collaboration, and we deeply value the group's feedback and the perspectives. Keith provided a statistic at the beginning of the presentation about the number of Ontarians with vision loss. And based on that number, every Ontarian, I figure, knows someone with vision loss, family member, a friend, a work colleague, if they're not experienced themselves. My father, for example, was an active, healthy person throughout his life, right up to and into his retirement. He played tennis a couple times a week. He drove around Ontario to enjoy his retirement years. And then he developed an eye condition, resulted in gradual vision loss. And now he's got about 5% of his vision remaining. So he can't do the activities that he was used to doing for 50, 60, well into his 60s. And he's had to adapt a lot, obviously, to that situation. And it's, I see that every time I see him, every time I talk to him, every time I visit with him. I understand from his perspective what he's going through and what the limitations are for him. And that makes it real for me. And it makes it, and I'm not the only person in the program where we have someone that we're supporting or a loved one with vision loss. So we are, even if we don't have vision loss ourselves, we still have that background. We still have that connection, and we bring that to the table along with the perspective of we as a government program and how a program works and the context we work in. I think everybody here is probably familiar with ADP. It's an open-ended claims-based program. What that means is we approve all applications that come in for every applicant who meets the eligibility criteria, and we pay the program's contribution to the devices, to the cost of the devices. If ADP is going over the budget at the end of the year, we don't shut down. We don't say, sorry, it's the end of February, we have no money left. The ministry finds the extra money. So there's not a limitation. I get an allocation, and if I'm going to go over, I have to justify why we're going over. But if the justification is because more people are benefiting from the program, that's a perfectly valid justification. Across the program, so across all the devices that we fund, we processed last year over 427,000 claims for 406,000 clients. and we paid out over $534 million for assistive devices. It's so $500 million. It's not obviously the largest program in the Ministry of Health, but it is certainly a significant bit of pocket change, and we do have to account for the dollars. We do have to have policies in place. We do have to have product catalogs in place. We do have to make sure that we're able to justify to the Auditor General what we're spending and why we're spending it, because we do get looked at by the Auditor General, and we get looked at by internal audit, and a number of other people and organizations ask us questions about our funding and our program. Within visual aids itself, about 4,000 clients last year with vision lost, and we spent about $2 million on visual aid devices. We know that healthcare costs are rising. We have to ensure that we're constantly working to be sustainable, efficient, cost-effective. That's why it's important that we continue to work with the Visual Aids Working Group and other stakeholders across the program to look for innovative and cost-effective ways to deliver our program. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we're meeting our clients' needs. Pardon me. We're the ADP. We're deeply committed to continuing to make progress on the survey report's recommendations. We're responsive to a broad range of stakeholder groups that make up the vision loss community in Ontario and the disability community in the province also. The working group, I'd have to say, has and continues to achieve progress on these recommendations. It has a few people have used the word collaborative. I appreciate hearing that. That's the same feeling that we have about the work with everybody around the table here. Just to give you some examples, and a couple of these have come up. One of the recommendations was to take a look at the list of devices that we're funding and clean up the catalog. Take out the devices that are no longer being manufactured in the province. We've done that. We've worked with the visual aids evaluation group. We've looked at we've talked to the colleagues around the table here, and we're proposing to take some devices out that have been discontinued by the manufacturers. The manufacturer is not in business anymore, or the device isn't being sold in the province anymore. We have to do this carefully. We have to make sure that we're not disadvantaging somebody who has a device and every 6 years comes in to get a new one and wants to keep that same device. We don't want to just take a device out of the catalog and then have that person come along in 6 months and say, "But I like that one. Why did you get rid of it?" So we have to be very thoughtful about this and make sure we're taking all the clients into consideration. We've talked about there's a recommendation about the visual aids policy manual. We've updated that. We've got the regional assessment center locations updated in there, and we've streamlined some of the authorizer requirements. There was a comment about a backlog of authorizer registration. Very happy to tell you that at the time of the request, the time of the recommendation came to us, there were 4 authorizers that were working on the registrations with us. We were sort of back and forth, making sure we're getting some information we needed from them. As of today, there's no outstanding authorizer registration. So we recognize how important authorizers are to ensuring that people with vision loss are getting their ADP-funded device. And when an application comes in by an authorizer or by someone to be an authorizer, we make sure we get those processes as quickly as possible, because we know if someone is approaching us, that there is a potential client base out there for them, and we want to make sure that the client base is being served. There's an innovation, there's a change we made, a modernization that we made in 2021, which across the whole program, we have what we call e-submission. So at the end of, until 2020, ADP was an entirely paper-based organization. We would have vendors would send sheets of paper into us with the applications for funding, and we would on the FIFO basis, first in, first out, we would go through the applications, enter them in the system, and move forward. And frankly, that took usually 8 weeks, sometimes longer, depending on the volume fluctuations, for that process to happen. The start of the pandemic, as horrible as it was, it did have one impetus for us. It was a catalyst for us to move to online processing. So we were moving that way anyhow, but it moved us along faster. So by e-submission, the vendors are now submitting claims electronically to us. In some cases, they get immediate feedback from us in terms of whether we can accept the application or not, and our IT system is making decisions, more decisions and faster decisions on which ones can be approved and which ones need to be pulled out for some manual assessment. So we're the amount of back and forth with vendors, the number of sort of incomplete or illegible forms, lost forms, those are virtually non-existent now with e-submission. So we've moved the processing time from 8 weeks or more down to as little as 2 weeks between the time that the application comes in and the payment actually makes it out to the vendor. And the payments are on a cycle, so that's a process that we've heard from the vendors they're quite happy with, and it means that they can provide the devices faster to the clients. Another catalyst that another change that was that the pandemic gave us a catalyst for was virtual assessments. We'd been talking about this. We've been thinking about this for a little while, about how to reduce burden, how to improve the client experience, and part of it was virtual assessments. With the pandemic, when there was more concern about being physically close to people, and we tried to minimize that across the program, we brought in virtual assessments. And we've kept that now, even with the restrictions, having been lifted. But we've kept virtual assessments in place. They're allowing for greater flexibility for clients. They're greater flexibility for our healthcare professionals. And still beyond that, with the VAWG, with the working group, we're exploring some new ideas for an alternative process for some of the devices to make it easier and more efficient to obtain them. We have coming out of the recommendations from the survey and the discussions with the working group, we have committed to keeping our vision loss stakeholders updated proactively on policy changes and product manual listing changes. Generally, what we have done, if there's been major policy changes, we send that information out to vendors and authorizers. What we're now going to do is we're going to be even more proactive than that. Even smaller changes we'll make sure they're aware of. And when we update our visual aid product manual with new products, we'll also make sure that the vendors and authorizers have that information immediately. They won't necessarily have to go and look for it themselves. We'll have told them that we made those changes. One of the recommendations talked about client survey. We actually conduct one client satisfaction survey every 2 years across the program. It talks about, it asks questions about interaction with ADP staff, but frankly, very few people talk to ADP. we don't get, compared to the number of clients we serve, we get a very, very small percentage of them actually talking to us. We rely a lot on the front line. We rely on the healthcare workers, the authorizers, and we rely on the vendors, who are the people who are dealing face-to-face with individuals with and looking at their clinical conditions and actually dealing with the various types of devices that they supply or recommend. So we ask a lot of questions about client interaction with vendors and with authorizers too. I'm hoping that a future survey will be able to publish them on the survey results. But I can tell you we consistently get good news. We consistently find that across the program, the people who are accessing the program are generally satisfied with what they're getting. They're mostly getting the right devices. They're dealing with people who are professional in their approach, who are knowledgeable in their approach. Generally, we get positive results across the program, and we do this every 2 years, and we want to make sure that consistently we are measuring these. We're measuring what clients are feeling, and that information comes back to us, and obviously, and we take a look at that then, and that helps us to figure out, okay, so if we're going to make a change to the program, here's some areas we might want to look at. Also, and Ian mentioned white canes. One of the things that we understand from the survey report recommendation is that the process involved in obtaining and authorizing white canes is a challenge for users. And we acknowledge that there are some improvements are needed there. There are some changes that we can definitely make that will improve this process. And we're taking a look at some options, and we're planning to come back to a meeting shortly of our working group to bring some ideas forward about what we're looking at and get some feedback on how we can change that. So those are just some of the examples of the progress we're making. Some of the quick wins, if you'd like. Ian said we're on a journey. We are. If it's a journey of 1,000 miles, we've taken much more than the first step, I think. There are still a lot of steps to go, but what's great is the group of us together. I think we're taking the journey together, and I really like that analogy. And Ian also, by the way, provided an excellent summary of the context in which ADP works as a government program. As I mentioned, we do have oversight. We have to be able to justify our funding and changes in funding and changes in what the program does and what we try to achieve. And some of our big policy changes need to get approvals at various levels of government, depending on how big the change is. So I appreciate Ian you mentioning that. He also gave a spot-on explanation of the work of the group, of what we're trying to accomplish together, of the assumptions and the barriers and opportunities that exist, and I think of the concrete progress that's being made. So thank you for that, Ian. Luna, I'm glad you're still here. Luna spoke eloquently about the importance of ADP being agile and of ensuring that users and clients are ensuring that the policy decisions that are being made that are impacting clients, that we understand they have an impact on clients' lives. And Luna was much more eloquent than I've been on this point. But no, we really appreciate that. I think some of the conversations, some of what people around the working group have told us have really been able to help us, myself, and I'll speak on behalf of others in ADP, really be able to make sure that we understand that anything that we do in the program does affect people. It affects real people, and we want to make sure that we are supporting people with vision loss. We want to make sure that we are we're achieving the program's mandate, and sometimes it's difficult to get to that point. It does take work. It does take effort. It does take building some evidence. It does take making persuasive cases. And I think with the help of the people on the working group, we're able to make some of those persuasive cases. Ian spoke at length, and Ian, I don't mind how long you took. It was great. I'm sitting here listening, and I make notes every time you're talking, Ian, and I've heard what you're saying, and I've thought, wow, yes, you really said that. We'll have to make sure that goes in our business case, and similar from Luna, a lot of things that Luna says, and Keith and Michael and the whole everybody around the table. It's just it's a great group of people that we're working with here. So I want to acknowledge the commitment of CCB. I want to acknowledge of the others, the commitment of the stakeholders across Ontario that are working with people with vision loss every day. I'm sure you hear this many times, and I hope you hear this from the people you work with directly, but I'll tell you from our perspective, thank you for the role you play in championing the health and quality of life for people with vision loss. On behalf of ADP, I commit to you, we'll continue to work with you and with the vision loss community to ensure that our program is making evidence-informed decisions, that we are making decisions in line with client needs. And ultimately, we want to make sure that the program is delivering the best possible outcomes for the people with vision loss and with other disabilities across the program. I think together we're sharing the same goals of improving the lives of people with vision loss. So thank you once again. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I've been pleased to hear everything that's been said so far, and I say thank you very much for including me in this august group.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated. I think you and I have both will agree that the last 8 or 10 months has been a learning experience for both. We've learned much about the ADP program. We learned that some of the things that we looked at going in were assumptions that weren't necessarily correct, and I think you've learned a lot. Your group and the ADP have learned a lot about people living with vision loss. It's a journey, and the journey goes on. There's collaboration going on. There's differences of opinion that both sides have. There's things that we're discussing now because we have authorizers for all the offices that are open, but we believe that we need more offices for that the Vision Loss Rehab Canada needs more offices. There's a couple things that I've learned from Ian, and I've learned from Jim Tokus and the people at the CCB. I used to say that we should make sure everybody that's living with vision loss gets a smartphone. And Ian was very quick to point out that smartphones don't do a thing for him until you add GPS and JAWS and a number of the other applications, which then makes it an assistive device. So there's a point that we're going forward with. The other point that I'd like to put forward was that we found it interesting, and this is through no fault of, I think this was maybe a little bit of an awakening at the ADP meetings, was the fact that we were listening to we're talking about virtual presentations or virtual assessments that could be made. And the ruling during the pandemic or at different times was that if you lived 100 kilometers from a assessment center, then you could do a virtual. So with the people that are in here today that are from Toronto, is there anybody in this audience that can get to 1229 Bayview public transportation in an hour. So some, but the majority of people in the city of Toronto from the outskirts or all around, whether it's Scarborough or out in the West End where Ian lives, 1 hour in the rural Ontario is 100 kilometers by car. About an hour and 10 minutes is probably the average somebody takes to get to Bayview to the Vision Loss Rehab Center. So there's things like that 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 we have to discuss, and we have to find a way around it. It's not simple. It's not simple for ADP, and it's and it's not simple for the people living with vision loss at this point in time. So with that, what I'm going to do is turn it over to our questions and allow for questions and answers. We got about 15 or 20 minutes. We're all available for questions. I believe, am I correct, that Lisa Terrell is online from Vision Loss Rehab to also take questions, and David is kind enough to stay on to take questions too. So I'll turn it over to Keith for questions.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'd like to thank David and the other speakers this afternoon. Just a personal comment is we've been at it for a year. We feel initially we didn't have a lot of progress, but I think we had to do a lot of digging, and we've dug up a lot of information over that period of time, and things are starting to move. And it's only started to move because of the great cooperation we've had from the stakeholders on the one hand, and from David and his ADP program managers on the other. So it's been a great collaboration, and I think we hope to be able to knock some of these recommendations off in the next few days, few weeks. I mean, okay, there are 3 questions here that have come in online. The first one I think has been answered by David, but it probably was asked before you gave your talk, David. It says, how much does the Ontario government spend on the ADP program today? How much is required looking ahead? So maybe the required part wasn't answered. Can you address that, David? Let's move on to the next question. The next.
That's kind of cool.
All right. I never thought I could yodel. Are you going to recommend the inclusion of invasion glass in the ADP program? This question came from Christy Braley, and I'd like to answer that by saying that as Ian has pointed out, we have well established a committee that will look at all devices, and they will evaluate them all. I don't think it's appropriate here to say that we're going to include one device or another. But
what we are doing is compiling a list of potential targets that we'll be sitting down with ADP and discussing to try to figure out if there are ways to include those devices as we go forward. There's a wide range of things that have been suggested from a wide range of sources. We've had input from vendors, from assessors, from the community, from eye care professionals. We've had all kinds of stakeholders putting into this process. And it includes a wide range of potential products and ways to access products. Some of the things that have been talked about are things like various kinds of peripherals that can plug into a smartphone or use a smartphone as its primary sort of computing source or internet access source. And that includes things like Envision glasses. The possibility of moving to an SMA model of software renewal is another thing that we're looking at in terms of its cost implications. That would eliminate a number of potential difficulties around mismatches between current accessible software and mainstream software that the accessible software is meant to provide access to. There's a really wide range of things that are on the table, and we'll be sitting down with a comprehensive list with ADP in the next couple of months to sort through.
Thanks very much, Ian. That is a lot more detail than I could answer, but that's the answer.
That's why we're a team, right?
That's the answer that I needed. So thank you for doing that.
No problem.
Okay, the next question is directed to you, Ian, and it says, Ian, is there a recommended and rating list of devices for different disabilities, where or when? So I guess the saying is there a list of recommended devices and a rating of devices.
I think part of the process of vetting this compiled list is going to be looking at where we feel the priorities really rest and trying to expedite the inclusion of those devices we feel will have the greatest impact. It's a little premature to get into that because we haven't actually had this conversation with the folks around the table yet. But that would be my initial response to that question.
I would like to add to that in the sense that one of the things that we're trying to do is, and what we've been trying to make sure that ADP had an understanding, and I think they've at least heard us when we said that a white cane and a smartphone loaded with apps becoming an assistive device, that those two circumstances, those two items are as important to somebody living with vision loss, and in no disrespect is meant, but as important as probably a wheelchair is to a person with mobility problems. They're extremely important for the vision loss community, and there's got to be an understanding of just how important they are.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anybody else on the panel, Lisa or David or Luna, any comment you want to make on this question or any other?
Hi, Keith. It's Lisa Terrell. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to, jump on this question, but also talk a little bit about the journey that we are all on. But it's also a discovery journey, and each time we meet in this collaborative effort, we get to discover more about who each other are and how these changes that have been put forth by CCB and the recommendations, how it all is going to benefit everybody. So we, excuse me, I'm not there in person today, a little under the weather, but we discover something new each time. So it's really hard to answer those questions in a finite way without diving into those weeds. So as Ian alluded to earlier, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of those pieces and, prioritizing those recommendations that Keith talked about and really what we can move through with ADP is really important. And sometimes it's hard not to have your chosen device be put forth. So it's a very complex process, as you alluded to earlier. And, I just hope that any consumers of ADP, especially for vision loss, that have vision loss and, seek services through Vision Loss Rehabilitation Canada in Ontario as authorizers, our individuals are authorizers, and they can actually recommend products that are going to be better suited for you. And maybe that's not an ADP product. So it is about that conversation, but it's also about the journey that that individual who comes to vision loss rehabilitation is about. It's more fulsome and broader and bigger than ADP. ADP is just one part of it. It is a program that absolutely our clients, and like I said, the consumers of ADP rely on. Without this program, many of them would not have been able to do the independent things that they have been over the past few years. But we are here. We're committed to, continuing this group. I'm continuing to put forth some of the recommendations for the recommendations of CCB and to really help ADP understand that journey of a consumer who is a client with vision loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any questions from people in the audience? In our live audience? Yes, ma'am.
Our living and breathing audience.
I'm not implying there are non-live people. Okay. Yes, could you give? There's a microphone coming up behind the lady in the second row, third row. Yeah. Thank you.
So is this thing working? Yes. Okay.
There you are.
There we go. I really wanted to ask this question to David because he mentioned it, and that is that the ADP people do a survey of the clients. Well, I've been an ADP client since 1988. And honestly have never been asked for any input into how I thought the program went. So I just got my new computer last year, and I'm looking forward in the next year or so to receiving a survey request.
Thank you so much. Yeah, or lady, I'm not, yeah. Question.
To that, or you figure that it's a rhetorical question?
For certain, I don't know if it applies to all assistive devices for the sight loss community, but I just know that my own experience, my screen reader software, I bought it at 2018, and then by the time I'm eligible for the next 5 years later, I mean, I won't last because I can't get updates. I don't even do updates for 2018 anymore. So is there any discussion on the 5-year period, especially if we're talking about digital technology, even laptops? Do they last 5 years anymore? I don't know. So if I've missed it, apologies, but I'd like to know, is there any flexibility considerations for certain technologies that just change so fast that 5-year cycle does not work anymore?
Want to take that in?
Sure. Yeah, actually, one of the recommendations specifically talks about the renewal periods being tailored to specific devices, and that includes software purchase. One of the things that came up recently, as I mentioned when I was giving my presentation, was this incompatibility between accessible software, particularly Zoom text, hit kind of a wall when Windows 11 came out. And the only way to fix it was to buy an upgrade. And if you weren't outside your 5-year eligibility period, ADP would not fund that. So one of the things that we are looking very seriously at, and we're actually in the middle of doing a costing exercise on it, is to see if it makes more sense to talk about funding sort of continuous upgrades once you're eligible for the initial software purchase. It looks on the face of it from a preliminary analysis that we've done that it could actually save the ADP some money. So I'm hoping that they will look favorably upon this as a proposal, but it's something that actually came out of the assessor and technical support network, that it makes no sense to buy software, an outright license every 5 years, when actually buying upgrades on an annual basis or biannual basis is actually cheaper and more effective in keeping accessible software compatible with mainstream software. So that is definitely on the table.
I wonder if David had is.
I know, but I'm asking.
Just wait a second. I want to see if David's got
one moment.
anything.
David, do you have anything to say in response to that question? Yeah. Question in there.
I was just wondering where the hole in the system was that so many people didn't access ADP, or did they just not know that they were accessing ADP? Where is the hole in the system that that visually impaired people are now accessing ADP?
Okay, I'd like to answer that. Based on our survey, we surveyed people who had accessed the program and people who hadn't. And then we asked the people who hadn't accessed the program why they hadn't, and a number of them hadn't accessed the program because they thought it was too complicated and the whole process didn't appeal to them. And then there were a bunch who just didn't know. So I'm not sure exactly how that broke down, but those are the two main reasons.
One of the questions that started this process with us was very simply that the vision community is got the smallest portion of this $530 million plus budget. We access less than $12 million over each of the last couple of years. And what we're looking at is, you heard from Luna and other panelists this morning, is this afternoon, the importance of the ADP program to the people with vision loss. And if that's the case, why weren't we going to it? And then there was a number of reasons that were been spelled out and which have been discussed, but you're absolutely correct. And that's part of what we're looking for. We want to be able to, at some point in time, communicate to the vision loss community that here is an ADP program that is viable for you, access it. And what we're trying to do now is to make sure that the program is viable so people can access it in a timely manner, get whatever assessments and authorizers they need to be done, and then get to the part where, as David said, the vendors can get paid in 6 or 8 weeks. Our problem is that the people that are applying for ADP are sometimes taking 3 or 4 months to get to the point where they get the product. So those are things that we're looking at, and they're on the table, and you're absolutely correct. It's a problem, and we're trying to take care of it.
Yeah, I'd like to pass on. David's microphone isn't working, but he has responded to the last question or two. And he says, since my mic isn't working, could someone explain that we survey a randomized sample of clients?
Yeah.
We do not survey 400,000 clients every year. In 2022, we sent surveys to 25,000 clients across the program. So that's 25,000 clients in total. That's not just vision health, I assume, not just people with vision loss. That would be all 18 subcategories. Is that right, David? Just nod. Thank you.
The best way to describe it is whatever the total number of people that access the ADP program, whoever is doing this study, and I think it was iPost, right?
Ipsos.
Yeah, we're doing the study. What they'll do is they'll take that list and then they'll go into the computer and set up a random sample where for how many people they want. So it'll be every number of people to come up with a list of 25,000. The interesting thing is when the last survey was done, there was only 146 respondents from the vision loss community.
There were 146 applications sent out.
Oh, yes.
There were only 40 some,
Yes.
I believe, and again, David can confirm this. There were only 40 some respondents who came back, who had access to visual aids category. We need to be doing better, I think, at monitoring on an ongoing basis and developing, statistical analyses of the total client journey through ADP on a much more regular basis, so that the system itself can be a lot more responsive and a lot more fine-grained, because the survey was put out across the ADP. It didn't necessarily focus directly on the experience of folks with vision loss. It's much more general than that, and I think we need to be a lot more focused.
Just to add to that, one of the suggestions we have is that the ADP program, and this wasn't a recommendation, but it was part of one of the written things that we produced early on, was that the same way a retailer, I'm sure if anybody's been to Canadian Tire lately or going into the bank or you do something, all of a sudden, within 3 days, you've got, how did we do? I think that should be something that we should be looked at, where it's an automatic situation where it just goes out to everybody. How did we do, with a very brief 2-minute survey?
Again, I think this is part of a much broader conversation about creating a digital service delivery platform and incorporating a lot of this kind of client feedback into that process, so that the total journey can be measured and respondents have an opportunity to have a more direct say.
We've got time for one more brief question. The young lady at the front.
This is really not that brief. Anyway, I believe that the ADP has a budget or a cap for a computer, because I am a laptop user or a computer user. And that was 2019 when I got mine. And they said there that, for example, I really forgot their cap, that the price of the computer that we will be going to buy is just about, for example, only $3,000. So beyond that, more than that amount, they will not be going to fund it. So I have to get a very inexpensive computer, which I really like. The other somehow a little bit expensive, not necessarily way above the budget, but they said, no, you cannot have it because that is beyond the budget that we impose for one computer that you will be going to have. So I said, okay. So is there specifically now that the prices of these technologies really becoming high, inflationary high at that. So I really don't know if that will also be adjusted by the ADP, because once they put a cap on that, there is no other choice for us except to buy within that budget and get a less, inexpensive that we really don't like at all. That okay, fine. So there is really no option for us at all. The other one that I would like to ask as well, which of course Ian made mention, as far as the ADP, we get ADP when we are under ODSP, we're free. Now, because I am now a senior, I am still with disability, right? It doesn't mean that when I became a senior, I lost my disability. I gained my normal thing. So I have to pay the 25%. Why not make it? And I hope that you will be going to work on that as well. That, well, even we are seniors, we are still have our disabilities. And then therefore we are supposed to receive as well. 100% free of charge buying this computer. Those are my, of course, not so brief, but I am also a talker like Ian.
Respond to both of those, Mato. So very briefly, the provision of trying to get ADP to include people who are eligible for the guaranteed income supplement, which only kicks in after you're 65, the guaranteed income supplement is the recognition by the government that you are a person who lives below the poverty line. And what they're doing is they're providing you an extra supplement to sort of help you overcome that difficulty. Okay. So if we're successful in incorporating eligibility for the GIS into the provisions that allow for 100% funding under ADP, that's going to solve that problem. Okay. The second piece of it was the cap on the computer price. One of the things that we discovered in doing our deep dive into the ADP policies is that ADP actually has, as part of their fundamental role, is to regularly review pricing. And one of the things that we're working towards with ADP is a full review of pricing in the visual aids category. It's been acknowledged, well, it's been discussed on the table that the cap of $1,250 for a laptop is hamstrung in two ways. One, it's too low to be able to afford basically anything that Apple makes. And Apple is one of the most accessible, like out of the box products that there is. But the stipulation that ADP will not fund above that limit. So if you buy something on your own that's higher than that, they will decline funding. That's a problem that needs to be addressed as well. So there are a number of pieces in that puzzle that are on the table, and we're having ongoing discussions with ADP about.
Thank you, Ian.
If I can just, David has a response here to the previous question. He said the question that you asked about free devices, David says devices are not free under ADP. The Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services pays the 25% client share for people on ODSP. So, I mean, it's free to the user, but it's not free to the government. There were also two questions here that would fall into the same category of preferred computers, and I think Ian has addressed all of that. And there's one last question I'd like to ask David quite quickly. It says, is the ADP doing anything to make Wi-Fi more accessible? Are you able to answer that, David?
It might be tricky to do over text.
Sorry about that.
While we're waiting, if he answers it while we're talking, I want to thank everybody that's online virtually and everybody that's here today for joining us. I want to thank David and from ADP and Lisa from Vision Loss Rehab for being here today. Obviously, Keith Gordon and Ian White, I appreciate it that you're here, and that I think people would be, I think we've learned from today, and at least we've seen that people are working together on it. I apologize. Uda Trevianis has asked me to apologize for her not being here today, but she was traveling and was unable to get back to where she needed to be, which was here. And she sends her apologies, and we'll at a future date have an opportunity to listen to her. So thank you very much, everybody. Keith, did the answer?
Yeah, I've got an answer.
We've got an answer from David.
Okay. Thank you, David, for living with this methodology. David says that Wi-Fi isn't within ADP's realm. We will need to figure out whether there's an Ontario or federal government ministry that will look after that, that looks after that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.